Is owning a home still the great Australian dream? Once upon a time, it was something lots of people were chasing. The white picket fence, a nice suburb, bit of land out the back. I feel like there's a song about it. Life couldn't be better. And I'm not saying it was ever easy to own your own home. There were always lots of sacrifices you had to make, even though my favourite conversation with my in-laws is that they bought their block of land for $20,000. They built their house for less than $70,000, and then their favourite comeback is, yeah, but we all paid less. And they're right. It is a very different time, and everything changes, and every generation had different struggles. But if we're talking home ownership today, what does it look like for young people chasing that dream? Julia Cook from the University of Newcastle has been taking a closer look at this. She's with you this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Is home ownership for young people still the great Australian dream?
Well, that's what we've been finding. So survey research that's been asking young people about their aspirations, about what they want for their life, has repeatedly found that the great Australian dream of home ownership remains a dream for young adults, especially that 25 to 34-year-old age cohort still rank home ownership as one of their key life aspirations. So it seems like yes.
Do we know why?
I don't think we know exactly why, but I think there's a lot of different reasons. So I think one really key amongst that is the kind of cultural meaning of home ownership. So one thing that's quite significant is that the majority of this kind of Generation Y cohort grew up in a home that was owned by their parent or guardian. So the experience of home ownership has been very normalised. Historically in Australia, we've had very high rates of home ownership, so it is what appears normal to us. We also can't ignore the valorisation of home ownership in renovation television shows. It's hard to deny. And in Australia, we love everything to do with home ownership and housing.
Yes. And watching other people go through that nightmare as well as wanting to do it ourselves.
Yeah, definitely.
I think every generation would feel like they had their challenges and there were things they had to sacrifice and do it tough to be able to get that mortgage and save for that house. Is it harder now, or is it really hard to compare?
It's always very difficult to compare because there's so many factors. But at the risk of offending some older listeners, I would venture that according to some metrics such as income to cost of housing, kind of the ratio of that, yes, it is more difficult. In real terms, property in our most populous areas is more expensive than it was in the past, even when we adjust for purchasing power. So when we're adjusting for the amount of income that people have, it still is much more expensive. So on that metric, yes, it is more difficult.
How do we get around it? Because young people are still managing to buy a house. What are they doing?
Well, that's actually what I'm really interested in. So a lot of research has looked at the experiences of those on the margins of home ownership, and especially young people who are increasingly living in rented accommodation. But I was quite interested in, we have narratives around like home ownership is so difficult for young people. Declining rates of young people are getting into home ownership. So my research question was, what are the young people who are buying a house? What is it that they're doing? And so I found a few different things. The one that I focused on is young adults who have gone to their parents for assistance with buying their first home. So that might be getting just a straight kind of gift of money to help them cover a deposit. It might be living with their parents for longer to allow them to save money more quickly, sometimes moving back in with their parents, having their parents be guarantor on their mortgages, all of those sorts of things. So especially as the property prices in places like Melbourne and Sydney really climbed.
Gosh, even the Hunter,
yeah.
I'd say.
Oh, yeah. We've had enormous price increases here as well. So really, in all of those areas, the price increases have skyrocketed since about 2010. And over that same time, we've seen the rates of parents who are stepping in to help their children to buy a house. They've really been increasing as well. some estimates have them peaking at about 55% of
Whoa.
first homeowners having some assistance from parents in about 2017 or 18. So, yeah, it's quite a significant phenomenon. It's hard to know how far-reaching, but the reports that we get from self-reported data from homeowners, reports from banks really indicate that it's quite a significant source of capital for young people.
Are we seeing the age of first home buyers increase as well? Maybe it's taking a little bit longer to save, a little bit longer to go out and explore the world before we're ready to settle down?
Definitely, yes. So, first home ownership is happening later and later in the life course. And for some people, so we do see that for some young adults, they may not buy their first home in their kind of 20s to early 30s. They might end up doing that in their late 30s, even their 40s. But there's also a significant group who are not buying a home even in their 40s. So are not getting into home ownership at all, are staying in the rental sector, which, obviously, if that's someone's preferred form of housing, there's nothing wrong with that. But we know from a lot of surveys around what people do want that that's not necessarily the case. So, yes, people are taking longer to buy their first home, but I think it's also important to note that for some people it's just not happening at all.
We know that post-Banking Royal Commission as well, banks have tightened up who they're lending to. Does going to mum and dad, does having that parental support, does that help overcome that view of being high risk that banks might see young people as?
That's a really interesting question. So actually, the Banking Royal Commission has tightened up some of the conditions, or I should say the outcomes of the Royal Commission have tightened up some of the conditions around receiving assistance from parents, because it was found prior to that the young people who receive direct financial support from parents in entering the housing market, they were actually more likely to then experience mortgage stress and eventually default on their loan. And the suspected reason for that is that they hadn't had an opportunity to develop good savings behaviour. So the requirement now is that you need to demonstrate to your bank that you have at least, I believe it's 6 months of genuine savings, just to show that you can manage your own budget, essentially. So, yes, in some sense, having some additional money for a deposit is still beneficial, and having a guarantor is certainly still beneficial, although there's some new conditions around that as well. But there is more of an emphasis on the homeowners themselves showing genuine saving behaviour before they're viewed as a fair risk for a mortgage for most banks.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for so many people in the housing market at the moment. Julia, thank you for talking us through some of the challenges for our young people.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Julia Cook there. She's the senior lecturer in the School of Humanities and Social Science at the University of Newcastle, talking there through youth and buying a house and what that looks like at the moment. Throw a global pandemic in there. That doesn't even need to be mentioned at the moment, and things have been a little bit tricky. I was surprised. I was going house hunting with a friend during, just after the lockdown started ending, and I couldn't believe how many people were at each open house. It's definitely not just Sydney and Melbourne. The Hunter is a very competitive real estate market, especially if it's your first time.
Do you listen to